当前国际秩序和经济全球化遭受冲击。
In the face of shocks to global order and economic globalization, China and Malaysia will stand with countries in the region to combat the undercurrents of geopolitical and camp-based confrontation,
阵营对抗暗流，突破单边主义，
overcome the countercurrents of unilateralism and protectionism, and safeguard the promising prospects for development in our shared Asian home.
At a time when multilateralism is under tremendous strain, when some nations abandon the principles of shared responsibility and others question long-standing commitments, China's global initiative offers a new lease on hope. They look outward, not inward. They speak not of rivalry, but of renewal.
Donald Trump is keeping the pressure on Harvard University after it rejected his demands to overhaul academic programs or lose federal grants. In a social media post Wednesday, Trump wrote Harvard is a joke and should no longer be considered even a decent place of learning. A day earlier, he threatened to strip the university of its tax-exempt status and said it should apologize after Harvard called his demands unlawful. Veena Dubal, a law professor at the University of California Irvine Law School and the general counsel of the American Association of University Professors, said the move could be a watershed moment.
Everyone was looking to see who would be the first universities to stand up to the Trump administration, and I'm really, really heartened that it is Harvard, one of the nation's oldest institutions, certainly one of the most well endowed, with a lot of frankly political connections. I mean, this could be a game changer in terms of saving the sector.
Beginning with Columbia University, the Trump administration has rebuked universities across the country over their handling of the pro-Palestinian student protest movement that roiled campuses last year, following the 2023 Hamas-led attack inside Israel and the subsequent Israeli attacks on Gaza. Some professors and students have said the protests are being unfairly conflated with anti-Semitism as a pretext for an unconstitutional attack on academic freedoms.
This is not just about pro-Palestine speech, and I really want to get that across here. This is people who do gender research, people who do research on race, people who do research about uterine fibroids, anything that kind of broadly can be seen as conceived as somehow woke or relating to diversity. I think those people are feeling an extraordinary chill, and certainly I feel it myself.
Harvard President Alan Garber, in a letter on Monday, said the Trump administration's demands, including an end to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, were unprecedented assertions of power unmoored from the law that violated constitutional free speech and the Civil Rights Act.
The U.S. has sent hundreds of mostly Venezuelan migrants to be held without trial at this mega prison in El Salvador. It's known as CCOT, an acronym for Terrorism Confinement Center in Spanish. The prison opened in February 2023 as part of Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele's highly popular hardline security policy, which has resulted in a sharp drop in homicides. El Salvador claims it is Latin America's biggest, with capacity for 40,000 inmates. It stretches across 57 acres and is located in an isolated rural region east of the capital, San Salvador. Bukele has said the prison cost $115 million to develop and equip. Video taken from inside the facility often shows prisoners tightly packed together with their heads shaved. The mega prison doesn't have an outdoor recreational area and won't allow family visits. A September 2024 report from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights expressed concerns about overcrowding. It cited a study that found CCOT inmates had an average of 6.45 square feet of space, which is below international standards. Bukele declared a state of emergency in 2022 that he said was needed to combat the country's notorious gangs and crime rate. It remains in effect, and some 84,000 people have been arrested. This includes alleged members of El Salvador's Mara Salvatrucha, or MS-13 gang, and its rival, Barrio 18. But human rights organizations have criticized El Salvador's prisons, and especially CICOT. They've reported human rights violations like torture, inmate deaths, and mass trials. During a visit from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in February, Bukele offered to incarcerate criminals deported from the U.S. in the mega prison.
He has agreed to accept for deportation.
The Trump administration first deported 261 people to El Salvador on March 15th. For 137 of them, the U.S. government justified the move under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, saying the men were members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, but providing few details about their cases. The White House said the U.S. government paid El Salvador about $6 million to receive the deportees.
This Chinese factory sells arcade products like claw machines to customers all over the world. It says it will keep exporting and may shift to other markets amid the trade war with the United States. iFun makes products for arcades, play areas for kids in shopping malls or trampoline parks. The company gets orders ranging from $50,000 to $500,000. Until recently, a fifth of its sales went to the US. However, US President Donald Trump imposed extra tariffs this year of 145% on imports from China. That's forced iFun's US customers to put orders on hold. Still, the company's president, Bin Jiang, is hopeful that Trump will roll back the tariffs before the pain really hits China. If that doesn't happen, Jiang says there are options.
And we can move our time, our time or our energy to other markets, like maybe like Mexico, Canada, or South America.
The iFun factory is located in China's southern manufacturing hub of Guangzhou, which has been dubbed the factory of the world. Jiang said he's not planning to set up an offshore location, as about 90% of the materials he needs are within a few hours' drive. For now, Jiang shares the hope of many other Chinese entrepreneurs that Trump will pivot on tariffs.
The World Trade Organization slashed its forecast for global merchandise trade from solid growth to a decline on Wednesday. It said US tariffs and spillover effects could lead to the heaviest slump since the height of the COVID pandemic. WTO's Director General, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala.
We project that global merchandise trade volumes will decline by 0.2% in 2025, nearly 3 percentage points below the level we would have expected without recent trade policy shifts.
The WTO said its new estimate was based on measures in place at the start of this week. US President Donald Trump imposed extra duties on steel and car imports, as well as more sweeping global tariffs. That was before unexpectedly pausing higher duties on a dozen economies. His trade war with China has also intensified, with tit-for-tat exchanges pushing levies on each other's imports beyond 100%.
We currently estimate that merchandise trade between the two economies will fall by 81%, a drop that would have reached 91% without recent exemptions for products such as smartphones. So without the smartphones, 91%, with that exemption, 81%. And this level of a drop in US-China trade of the magnitudes we are talking about is virtually tantamount to a decoupling of the two economies.
The WTO chief added that this trade disruption could increase Chinese merchandise exports across all regions outside North America by between 4% and 9%. And other countries would have opportunities to fill the gap in the US in sectors like textiles and clothing. The WTO said the services trade, though not subject to tariffs, would also take a hit. That was by weakening demand related to goods trade, such as transport and logistics. Broader uncertainty could dampen spending on travel and investment-related services. The WTO said it expected commercial services trade to grow by 4% in 2025 and 4.1% in 2026. That's well below baseline projections of 5.1% and 4.8%,
Britain's highest court ruled on Wednesday that only biological and not trans women meet the definition of a woman under equality laws. The landmark decision was greeted with dismay by trans supporters, but welcomed by the government as bringing clarity. It's the latest example of the wider debate around transgender rights ending up before the courts. Here is Deputy President of the Supreme Court, Patrick Hodge.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex. But we counsel against reading this judgment as a triumph of one or more groups in our society at the expense of another. It is not.
The much-anticipated ruling focused on whether a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate is protected from discrimination as a woman under Britain's Equality Act. Critics said that including a trans woman as a woman under the law could impact single-sex services for women, such as refuges, hospital wards and sports. But transgender campaigners said that excluding them could lead to discrimination, especially over employment issues. Wednesday's British judgment followed legal action by a campaign group for Women Scotland against guidance issued by the Scottish Government that accompanied a 2018 law designed to increase the proportion of women on public sector boards. The guidance said that a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate was legally a woman. Here is Susan Smith, co-director of FWS, outside the court in London.
And today, the judges have said what we always believed to be the case, that women are protected by their biological sex, that sex is real, and that women can now feel safe that services and spaces designated for women are for women, and we are enormously grateful to the Supreme Court for this ruling.
The Supreme Court said trans people, whether trans women or men, would not be disadvantaged by its decision, as the Equality Act afforded them protection against discrimination or harassment. But the legal experts said the ruling showed equality legislation might need to be urgently updated to ensure trans people were protected.
A U.S. federal judge on Wednesday ruled that Trump administration officials could face criminal contempt charges for violating an order halting deportations of alleged members of a Venezuelan gang who had no chance to challenge their removals. In a written ruling, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg found probable cause to hold Trump officials in criminal contempt of court, saying the administration demonstrated willful disregard for his March 15th order, barring the government from deporting alleged members of a Venezuelan gang to El Salvador under the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. He pointed to an ex-post retweeted by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in which El Salvador President Nayib Bukele shared a link to a news story about Boasberg's order blocking deportations and said, "Oopsie, too late." The ruling is the closest any judge has come to suggesting the administration could be punished since Trump returned to the White House, and it escalates the confrontation between the judicial and executive branches of government. A Justice Department spokesperson said Boasberg's, quote, underhanded attempt to maintain power over this case is a judicial power grab that the Department of Justice will fight by all means necessary. Many of the migrants' lawyers and family members say the deportees are not gang members and were never given a chance to contest the U.S. government's assertion that they were.
Nearly 36 global pharmaceutical companies have demanded help to maintain operations in the EU. That's ahead of expected US tariffs on imports, according to a French business outlet on Tuesday. It said that companies including Pfizer, Eli Lilly and AstraZeneca sent a letter to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, in it saying they face cost disadvantages in Europe versus the US. As in the US, drugs are sold at prices on average twice that of some European countries. Among their demands were measures to compensate them for the cost of pharmaceutical innovations, the report said. The companies also asked the EU to simplify regulations. They noted that companies must currently conduct multi-country clinical trials for drugs. Last week, European Pharmaceuticals warned von der Leyen that US tariffs would hasten the industry's shift toward the United States and away from Europe. The US is the biggest market by sales for big pharma companies. Europe and the United States have interconnected supply chains for medicines, and according to Eurostat, EU medical and pharmaceutical exports to the US totaled over $101 billion in 2023.
The search for alien life just took a giant leap. Scientists may have found the best hint yet thanks to the James Webb Telescope. They found gases in the atmosphere of a distant world that on Earth come only from microbes like marine algae. Dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl disulfide were found in observations of the planet K218b. That means the planet might have tiny life forms, but scientists say it's just a possible sign and more research is needed. Even so, it's the biggest hint yet that we might not be alone. Niku Madhusudan is an astrophysicist from the Institute of Astronomy at the UK's University of Cambridge. He says K218b may show the strongest sign of life beyond our solar system.
We found the strongest evidence to date on a biosignature molecule, in this case a combination, potentially around another star outside the solar system. And that is a major breakthrough in our search for life beyond the solar system. Not only that there is a chance that the planet can actually be habitable, but what we are finding is that we are demonstrating that it is possible to detect biosignatures around in atmospheres of such planets around nearby stars with existing facilities.
K218b is 8.6 times as massive as Earth and more than twice the size. It orbits in the so-called habitable zone around a small, dim red dwarf star 124 light-years away in the Leo constellation. Webb telescope observations from 2021 to 2022 found methane and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of the alien world. It was the first time carbon-based molecules were found on a so-called exoplanet in a star's habitable zone.
Currently, the only scenario that explains all the observations, in other words, detections of methane and carbon dioxide, non-detection of ammonia and carbon monoxide, and now possible detection of these molecules, means that based on our current understanding, the only scenario that explains all of this is one where it's a Haitian world that is teeming with life. And what is a Haitian world? It's an ocean-covered surface with a thin hydrogen-rich atmosphere. So, and the ocean being habitable.
To analyze a planet's atmosphere, scientists watch as it passes in front of its star. The Webb telescope catches the light passing through the atmosphere, helping scientists identify the gases in it. The goal of exoplanet research is to find life on an Earth-like world. But Madhusudan urged caution for now.
This is a monumental discovery. It is very important, but we also have to be extremely cautious. The reason is that this is one of the biggest questions we have asked as a species in all of science, and we have to deal with it very carefully, in that we want to be really, really robust in establishing whether this is actually life that we are seeing.
U.S. retail sales rose by the most in more than 2 years in March as households stepped up purchases to avoid higher prices from President Trump's tariffs. The Commerce Department on Wednesday said retail sales increased 1.4% last month, up significantly from February's 0.2% rise. Auto sales drove most of the buying, with dealerships reporting the biggest jump in receipts since January 2023. Trump's 25% global car and truck tariffs came into effect in early April, with industry analysts and manufacturers warning that the duties would significantly raise motor vehicle prices. A slew of other tariffs have been imposed on most goods, resulting in a stampede by consumers to stock up. But the robust sales pace is likely to fizzle in the months ahead, amid fears of slowing growth and consumer sentiment near 3-year lows. One economist told Reuters, quote, "It's hard to feel good about Americans panic buying cars as consumer confidence craters," adding that the economic outlook is in flux with, quote, "large changes to trade policy nearly every day." U.S. stocks ended sharply lower on Wednesday, with the Dow dropping 1.7%, the S&P 500 losing 2.25%, and the Nasdaq nosediving 3%. Speaking at the Economic Club of Chicago, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said larger than expected tariffs from President Trump likely mean higher inflation and slower growth. Powell added that the central bank is waiting for greater clarity before considering policy changes. Stocks added to early declines after Powell's comments. Michael Landsberg is Chief Investment Officer at Landsberg Bennett Private Wealth Management.
I think the market hoped that he would be clairvoyant and tell us where everything's going to go. I think there was talk there that the tariffs were going to affect earnings later on, and he didn't necessarily say how much it was going to be, but obviously the idea that it was larger than expected in terms of the tariffs, I think scared some of the market participants to say, hey, maybe earnings may decelerate more than we're expecting.
Among individual stocks, chip makers plummeted due to U.S. trade restrictions with China. NVIDIA shed nearly 7% after the AI chip leader said it would take a $5.5 billion charge due to the U.S. government's limit on exports to China, a key market for one of its most popular chips. Rival Advanced Micro Devices, which flagged charges of up to $800 million, fell more than 7%. And shares of Dutch chip-making tools giant ASML also dropped 7% after it warned that Trump's tariffs had led to more uncertainty about its
Heineken
outlook.
reported forecast-beating first-quarter sales on Wednesday, but warned of ongoing volatility caused by uncertainty about the levels and scope of global tariffs. Some U.S. tariff announcements have included targeting beer in cans. Shares in the world's second-largest brewer by global volumes rose 2.8% in early trade, as investors welcomed another quarter of delivery. It comes after Heineken cheered investors with its 2024 performance in February. Some shareholders have in the past criticised Heineken for volatility in its results, but the brewer had already flagged a tougher start to this year due to factors such as a late Easter. Its revenues and volumes both exceeded analysts' forecasts. Heineken said it sold more of its pricier labels such as namesake brand Heineken and saw strong growth in key markets like Vietnam, which has dragged on its performance in recent years. Heineken did warn that uncertainty around tariffs, as well as weak consumer sentiment, inflation and currency changes presented risks ahead, but still expects between 4 and 8% profit growth in 2025. ASML, the world's biggest supplier of computer chip-making equipment, says tariffs are creating uncertainty for its 2025 and 2026 outlook. Although its CEO has said his conversations with customers supported ASML's expectations that 2025 and 2026 would be growth years. In an interview published on the Dutch Group's website, its head of finance broke down 4 categories of tariffs that could impact business. These are shipments to the US, tariffs on imported parts and tools, material imports needed for its manufacturing operations there, and tariffs from other countries on US exports. ASML shares fell 7.4% in morning trade. The global race for AI has put ASML at the forefront of the industry. It's the maker of the world's most advanced chip circuitry engraving system, the EUV lithography machine, which makes the chips of designers like NVIDIA or Apple. In its quarterly earnings release, ASML said AI continues to be the main growth driver. Its net bookings, the most closely watched figure in the industry, were $4.4 billion in the first 3 months of 2025, missing analyst estimates. The company forecasts sales of between $8.1 and $8.7 billion for the second quarter.